This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 122 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today we're talking about one of my favourite topics, talking to locals when we travel. I really love any chance I get to chat to local people in a destination I'm travelling in, because for me that's something that it's hard to do elsewhere, and it's always so enlightening, and you really get to have a chance to find out how the locals really live. I just find that really fascinating. I love to find out the similarities between our lives and the differences, and just to see what kind of thing the locals talk about wherever you are. One of my favourite things to do. In fact, a lot of people say to me, oh yes, but what if you don't know the language? And sometimes that is quite a barrier, although it's amazing what you can kind of express without too many common words. But I, in fact, just before recording this, coincidentally listened to a new podcast my friend Darren Cronian has recently launched. It's called Travel in 90 Seconds. So they're really short episodes, although I note a little longer than 90 seconds usually, but really just a few minutes. And in episode 14, he tells the story of how he chatted with someone in Korea purely using the Google Translate app, because both of them didn't know English or Korean. He made the point there's no excuse anymore. You can talk to the locals, even if it's just using a Google Translate app or something like that. You can still, kind of make conversation of a sort. And they chatted for ages, apparently. So I thought that was lovely. In fact, that conversation, I think, started because the Korean wanted to know about Darren's camera, which reminded me of a couple of elderly Latvian guys I met in Ventspils in Latvia many years ago. I know it was many years ago because I was using a digital camera, and it was the first time that they had seen one in real life. And one of them knew all about it, but hadn't seen one, and his friend didn't know, and he was explaining it to his friend. And we had a big chat, and, he got me to take a picture of them and then, show him immediately on the screen behind. It seems so everyday now, but back then it was quite a novelty. And we had a lovely chat about that. So yeah, I love meeting the locals. But anyway, actually speaking of photography, I need to welcome back this month's sponsor, Flytographer. So Flytographer is basically a service so that when you're on a trip somewhere, you can book an hour with one of the local photographers who they've kind of interviewed and trained up. And then you will end up with the awesome souvenir of professional photos of you and your family or friends in a beautiful destination. So I think this is a great idea. And as the topic today is all about talking to locals when we travel, then I guess another bonus about using Flytographer is you get to do exactly that. You get to talk to locals. So all their photographers are local people to their destinations, but they also speak English. So perfect. It's a great way to spend some time with a local and ask them about all those things you've been wondering about their hometown or home country. And certainly if you read the reviews on the Flytographer website, there's lots of examples of people getting tips for sightseeing, meals, shopping experiences from their photographer, and even a few times with people had got along with their photographers so well they end up sharing a meal with them after the shoot, which is delightful. So I know it's sometimes difficult to find ways to get chatting to locals, so it seems like this is an excellent way to end up with wonderful holiday photos and have the chance to chat to a local. So you can book a shoot on their website at flytographer.com, and you can get $50 off a shoot by using the code Amanda50. So on to today's episode proper, and my first guest is Eva Westerling, a long-time friend of the podcast and someone who I delightfully now call a friend who I met through the podcast. And we had another chat recently because she's done a few more interesting travels again. She keeps going to interesting places, and I wanted to chat to her about how she got to know a few locals recently on a trip to Morocco.
As you know, I recently went on to a long trip to Morocco with Anna, who's been a guest on your show also. She had the great idea to go hiking. She planned it for 4 weeks in the beginning, I think, but it ended up being much shorter than that, from Zagora to Mazuga. And I found the idea so interesting that I asked if I could join. And yeah, we ended up meeting in Marrakesh in November. And went on this adventure. And the best thing about it really was that we got to spend so much time with those two local guides that we had. One of which works in, well, they both, of course, work in tourism, but one of them speaks multiple languages and is more used to the interaction with the customers and everything, while the other one is, a real kind of village Berber, Bedouin, where I'm not even sure if he lives in a house or a tent where he lives. And
cool. A real local, really, so to speak.
Yes, and I mean, the bigger the group, the less interaction you have with them, right? So this was perfect to actually having time to talk to them, and because we shared the big tent for cooking and eating and hanging out, and if the weather was really kind of bad with lots of storms or sometimes even rain, we also slept in the big tent, so there was a lot of interaction, a lot more than just, in big group travels or something. So yeah, it was a great chance to really interact. And yeah, of course it's difficult, especially with Omar, who is from the village and speaks Berber and some French. And yeah, my French not so good. I understand quite a bit, but I don't really talk that much. So, and he doesn't speak much Arabic, which was a pity because I've studied Arabic for the last year and it would have been nice to use it, but that was even more difficult than in French.
Oh, really? Right.
Yeah. But so, I think the way I used to sort of bond with local people is, first of all, trying to learn their language. And of course, with Berber, that's kind of impossible because there's no material anywhere. Yeah. I remembered a few words from my trip to Morocco 3 years before.
Handy.
So I could say, I mean, they use good morning and stuff in Arabic, but I could say a couple of things in Arabic, like in Berber, like I'm hungry, or the food was good, or I've had enough, some little tiny things.
Even that often helps, just knowing a few words, because that makes them more comfortable, I think.
Exactly. And they just see that you're putting some effort in, that you're willing to connect. And I think that's the biggest part about it, right? To show that you're actually interested, that you actually want to know about them. So I always try to ask lots of questions, and sometimes it's a bit tricky because you don't want to come across as too nosy or obnoxious.
It's hard to know sometimes what's the boundaries of what things is it okay to ask about and what isn't it, because it's such a cultural difference, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. So normally I just start with like easy questions like, where are you from? Where did you grow up? Are you married? Do you have kids? And they start talking a little bit about things like that and, try to find out if they went to school, because in a place like that, that's not even a given, right? And it's so, I think to me, it's really important to know those kind of things, to know which level of education they have, to pick topics I can talk to them about. Like, I don't want to, bore them with, Westerner conversation.
Yeah. Or make them feel uncomfortable about asking them stuff that they just are not going to know about. Yeah,
exactly. So, talking about like what's your favorite music or what's your favorite movie or even what's your favorite book doesn't make sense because they probably don't have that. And if they do, I wouldn't know any of it because it would be local stuff, right? So, it was, that was really, it's always a bit tricky in countries that are culturally so different, but also it's a nice challenge to still try to get the most out of them and, like actually bond. So, with those two guys, we had some nice evenings that I think were actually a nice bonding exercise. Like one evening they asked me to show them photos from all my travels. So apparently they're interested in other countries too and how it looks like there. So of course I have tons of photos from like Instagram and stuff on my phone, and we spent a few hours just going through them and looking at it. And I told them some stories about the places and the people, and so that was nice. And then also after a few days, Hassan, one of the guides, he got a hold of a game of cards and we started playing Uno every evening. And it was so funny because they were both like little boys, like trying to cheat and, really no poker face at all. You could totally see it in their faces when they had good cards and were just waiting to throw one in front of you that, would have to take up 10 cards or something. And totally funny. But
That's gorgeous.
I think that brought us together as a team pretty well. It just felt like traveling with friends because we had so much fun together doing that. And so that was really cool. And then, towards the end of the trip, when we came into the area that Hassan grew up in, and all his family lives in all the little villages all over there, he actually took me to a village where his father is from, and his uncle lives there, and I think it's great uncle, his grandfather's brother, who's almost 100 years old, and his wife. So, I mean, it's not that I really met them, but, he shortly introduced me, and then he started talking to them, and I was just there watching. And it really felt like such an honor to, be taken there. And it shows that he really trusted me to not do anything kind of stupid, like two tourists.
Yeah, exactly. All those games of Uno led to a proper friendship.
Yes, in a way, it really did. And so that was really, really nice to see how they live.
I have to admit to being rather envious of Eva's trip, and especially how close she got to get to a couple of locals to find, to really learn a lot about how the local people live in Morocco. I think that's awesome. Of course, the other extra awesome part about this story is that Eva was on a trip with Anna, who was also a guest of the Thoughtful Travel podcast, and they only got in touch because of hearing each other's stories on the podcast. So that is pretty cool, I think. So well done. Now, of course, the ideal world would be that I'd got to go on that trip with them as well. But, not enough time, not enough money, all the usual issues. But anyway, I'm glad they got to have it. It was a great story. Now, interestingly enough, my next guest today is Talon Windwalker, and he is also speaking about some experiences in Morocco. So he was house sitting in Morocco and got to know a local who was working in the area, and they had some really interesting and deep conversations.
Another interesting experience, we did house sitting a lot when we traveled, and we had this really cool opportunity to house sit on an oasis in Morocco.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so we did that, and they had kind of a good sized compound. And then one of the locals came and did a lot of the landscaping and stuff, and he spoke English. So we really communicate well, and she would help him make bricks. And, I thought, what a cool experience, to get to see how they do all this and be part of it. But one time he and I were talking, and he was curious about some things they've heard about American culture. So we were talking a little bit about that. And I knew he was single, and I was kind of surprised because he was in his 20s. And we talked, so he was telling me about how difficult it is to date in their culture, and how serious getting married is, and how that whole thing functions, and was talking about also the importance of women being virgins, and how women who were in previous relationships, they were married and then were widowed or divorced. A lot of them were going to have surgeries to basically help them pass the virginity test at the doctor's office. And I'm horribly offended, as an American, that's just not okay.
No.
I'm straining, and I'm like, okay, this is not my world. It's not my world. This is their culture. I have to keep my mouth shut. And he was telling me all this stuff. And then some of the other things, I was really struggling. And then he got to the point where he was talking about objectification of women, and we're talking about in Morocco, women don't have to cover up. You'll see some women that dress very Western, and others who will cover, where they won't cover their face, but everything else is covered. And they may even wear gloves that you can't see their hands. And so it's a big spectrum of what you might find. And so we were kind of talking about that. And he talked about going to Spain and other parts of Europe and just being horrified at advertising and stuff on billboards and how horribly we objectify women. And I just sat there and I thought, oh my gosh, he's right. It never,
yeah,
because that's what I grew up with. It never really hit me how badly we do that and how really we treat women and their bodies really poorly and like crap. And it really just forced me to have to do this whole different introspection about, well, what have I done that's really misogynistic? What are my outlooks that really need to be reevaluated and changed? And so it was a very fascinating experience. Just we had this, first this initial major clash of cultures that I had to basically just keep my mouth shut because I'm in his country, and just had to try to absorb it. And then that discussion led to further exploration of my own culture. And so that's something I'm not sure I'll ever forget either.
Oh yeah, sounds like a really fascinating discussion, and it's interesting, isn't it? It's what we grow up with is normal to us. What he grows up with is normal to him, and there's definitely pros and cons of both of it. But it's easy for us to see an aspect of another culture which shocks us, but harder for us to recognize it in our own. So I think this one of the very valuable parts of traveling, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was interesting too, because we had been in some other parts of Morocco before we came to the Oasis, and in one of them was a beach area, and I remember seeing, men stripping down to their briefs and going out into the water. And of course, when they come out of the water wearing just their briefs, there's nothing left to the imagination.
Yeah.
But women covered head to toe, just their face showing, that are taking their naked kids into the water and playing there on the shore, and it was something watching that bothered me. I'm like, this isn't fair at all. This really is not fair. And then later on, having this discussion with him and the way it started, and just it was very, very fascinating just to have to really look at things and try to see that from a very different angle. And it was interesting too, talking about how in their culture, when a woman marries, she moves into a husband's family's home, basically. And she kind of takes care of his mom and his dad, and mom kind of bosses her around. And it's just like,
wow,
I don't know that I could be too fond of the idea of marriage if I was a woman in that environment.
Me neither. It sounds horrifying. Talon and his Moroccan friends certainly had some really interesting conversations by the sounds of it. And I think it's important, as Talon said, to kind of withhold your judgment, because of course everyone grows up in different circumstances. Plus, if you manage to kind of not show too much judgment at what other people express about their own culture, they'll tell you a lot more, and it might turn out to be more understandable in that situation. I'm thinking of when I was living in Japan, and there's, as much as I adore Japan, there's certain things about Japanese lifestyle and some of the attitudes that don't gel well with me. I always have felt glad I wasn't born a woman in Japan, because I feel that things are still not very equitable for women. And for example, I had women who would come to my English classes secretly and hadn't told their husband that they were coming to English classes because they knew or assumed or thought that their husband wouldn't approve. And rather than being horrified and telling them that's terrible, go home and tell them and that's ridiculous, obviously I didn't do that. And try to dig deeper into the whole situation. And still a fascinating thing. It's still not what I think is right, but every culture is different, and that's part of the beauty of the world, I guess. Wouldn't it be awful if we were all the same? Although it would be nice if we could all be kind of fair and just, but how do you decide for sure what that is? Anyway, before I get too philosophical, let's move on to my final guest for the day, and that is Joanne Karts, who has some interesting stuff to tell us about a particular way to meet and chat with local people when you travel.
When I was going to Bilbao one year, I was looking up, what kind of walks can I do around the city, free tours, etc. And I came across something called the Greeter program. And the Greeter program is a worldwide program where different cities set up this volunteer organization where a local person volunteers as a greeter to meet whoever signs up to their program for an hour or two or sometimes longer, and just show them the part of the city that they love. So we went to Bilbao and we met up with this lovely lady. She was a horticultural or landscape architect.
Uh-huh.
And she took us around during her lunchtime.
Oh.
And she showed us, parts of the city that you would see possibly if you had a guidebook and took you around. But you could then talk to her about the economy. You could talk about, what's employment like, because obviously Spain's been suffering from unemployment and that sort of thing. And it was just the most wonderful experience with us. She took us to a bar, wouldn't let us buy her a drink or anything like that, because it's supposedly completely voluntary. They do ask you sometimes to donate to their organisation because they need the money to keep their website going and that sort of thing. So since then, I've been on a greeter tour in Paris, in San Sebastian, and also in Chicago. But there's one in Sydney now. It's been going for about 3 years. Another fellow blogger helped to set it up.
Uh-huh.
She's the Sydney expert. Her blog is the Sydney expert. And so I've signed up as a volunteer greeter in Sydney.
Excellent.
Yeah, I've only done a few. I've got one on Tuesday, actually, with a couple from Canada. But I studied Spanish for a long time and then got sick of going to lessons. And so now I've decided to try and meet up with Spanish speakers.
And show them around Sydney.
Yeah, so I've done two, a woman from Barcelona, and I did a family, man, woman and child from Buenos Aires. And each time we sort of work out together what we want to do, and off we go for 2-3 hours. And if they want to donate to the program, they do. Otherwise, it's just a great cultural exchange, actually. It's fabulous.
Oh, that is really a fabulous idea. And you get that bonus out of it of being able to practice your Spanish as well as that, genuine joy of, showing your city to other people.
Yeah, I must say I made a mistake with the very first person that I signed up. I didn't read on the site that they spoke German. And anyway, I accepted or offered my services to them, and they said, oh, but we speak German. I said, oh, well, that's okay. I'm good with people with other languages. I've worked with people with other languages, and that'll be fine. It actually worked out fine. It was fine. But the husband didn't speak hardly any English, so she was translating for him quite a bit. But in the end, we walked through parts of Sydney that he would never have seen if he hadn't gone with me. So, it ended up well.
Oh, yeah, I think it's great. And the chance to be able to ask them to ask your greeter about other, local topics, like what's the economy like, or, just little everyday things that are very hard to really get a feel for otherwise.
All of that. I mean, the one couple I went around Newtown, and there was the Go Get Share Car system, and, they've never heard of a share car system in Buenos Aires. And there was the little street library, and I love all those community things, so I point those things out. So, yeah.
Oh, that's fabulous. Oh, that's an excellent idea. I'm going to go and look this up and see where I can try one out myself. I remember when years ago, I had made a couple of trips to Russia, like early 2000s-ish and stuff. And I was always using homestays, and the agency that booked the homestays, they always booked a guide for your first, 2 hours in Moscow or St. Petersburg. And it was the same kind of situation, but just, because what I was really interested in, the sights and the sightseeing part, that's fine. I can deal with that all myself, but I was just grilling them for, what it's like to really live here and, all of that kind of extra information. And it's such a great opportunity to be able to really, begin to understand a destination a bit better. So Joanne got me really intrigued about this whole greeter concept, and I did a little bit of research, and I found that the Global Greeter Network started back in the early 90s in New York City, and they described it as a way to let tourists see the city through the eyes of the locals. Back when New York still had a reputation as being dangerous. I vaguely remember this now from my teenage and early 20 years of age, and I'd forgotten that we used to think that was a terribly dangerous place to visit, because now it's just an awesome place. So, yeah, I definitely want to look into Global Greeter Network people when I'm traveling around in some of the locations where they have a network. So sadly, they don't have one in Perth at the moment. So if you're coming my way, you'll just have to look me up instead. I don't think I'm as informative as a proper greeter, but happy to show you Perth at some stage. And I'm a pretty good local, I think. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to episode 122 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Thank you very much to my guests, and here's where you can find them. You can find Eva's blog, Not Scared of the Jet Lag, at notscaredofthejetlag.com. You can find Talon's website, One Dad One Kid, at onedadonekid.com. Both the ones are digit ones. And you can find Joanne at Travel with Joanne at travelwithjoanne.com. And also, if you're curious about the Global Greeter Network, then their website is also pretty logical, globalgreeternetwork.com. I would love to hear your stories about chatting with locals when you travel. And have you got any special tips of ways to kind of build a connection with local people when you travel, so that you can get to know some of the inner secrets of a destination? So please hop over to the Facebook group and let me know what your ideas are. You can find the Facebook group either by hitting the link in the show notes, or just by heading to Facebook and searching for Thoughtful Travellers and requesting to join the group. I do have a special request, speaking of requests. If you are an iTunes or Apple Podcast listener, I would love it if you could give the show a rating or a review, because that helps to spread it to more people. Thank you. And if you're listening on Spotify, like I know many people are, hit that heart at the top of your app to like the show. That would be awesome. Thank you. Now, all of this info can be found in the show notes. And for this episode, the show notes are at notaballerina.com/122. Thank you very, very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.